The first thing I heard when I woke up was my stepmother's voice telling the doctors to let me die. Not whispering it. Not hesitating.
Calm. Steady.
Like she was ordering coffee. Don't bother reviving her. Let the paperwork run its course. That was Jeanette. The woman who held my hand at my father's funeral. The woman who made him soup every morning for 12 years while his lungs slowly stopped working. The woman who had just paid a mechanic to cut my brake line on a mountain road and was now standing at the foot of my hospital bed waiting for me to finish dying so she could collect $4 million. I couldn't open my eyes. I couldn't move my arms. The ventilator was pushing air into my chest at a rhythm I hadn't chosen, and the room smelled like iodine and floor wax and something floral that had no business being in a place where people fought to stay alive. But I could hear everything. Every single word. And I made a decision in that moment, in the dark, inside a body that refused to obey me. I was going to survive. And when I did, she was going to lose everything. My father, Douglas Myers, married Jeanette Harlow when I was 17. I remember that wedding because it was the first time I'd seen my father cry since we buried my mother. But the tears were different. My mother's funeral was in December, snow in the parking lot, my father squeezing my hand so hard his knuckles went white. Jeanette's wedding was in June, a garden ceremony behind her sister's house, and my father stood at the altar with that stunned, grateful expression of a man who couldn't believe someone had offered him a second chance at something he thought was gone forever. Jeanette wasn't the villain. I need you to understand that, because the story doesn't make sense without it. She had her own daughter, Kelsey, who was 14 and spent the entire ceremony standing beside me in a dress she clearly hated. Jeanette herself was 42, brown hair cut short, practical shoes, the kind of woman who had no patience for nonsense. She'd been an accountant before she met my father. She left that job to take care of him when the diagnosis came. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Then lung cancer. 12 years of oxygen tanks and hospital visits and medication schedules and a slow, patient decline that would have broken most people. Jeanette didn't break. She drove him to oncology appointments in her sedan with the cracked dashboard. She sorted his pills into a weekly case with blue caps. She slept on a cot beside his hospital bed for the last 3 months of his life and never complained. Not once. Not where I could hear her. My father died 14 months before I woke up in that ICU. He was 67. I was 28, recently married to Grant, working as a freelance graphic designer from a desk in our spare room, building a quiet life one client at a time. And there was one thing my father had asked of me 6 months before his mind started clouding with morphine. He asked me to sign a medical power of attorney, naming Jeanette as my healthcare representative in the event I couldn't make decisions for myself. I was 23 when I signed it, unmarried. Jeanette was the closest thing to a mother I had. My father put the pen in my hand, and I didn't think twice. I should have thought twice. I should have thought about it every single day for 5 years. But I didn't, because it never occurred to me that the woman who cried real tears at my father's graveside was already doing the math on how to make that document useful. The first thing I remember after the darkness was a sound. A tone repeating every 4 seconds, mechanical and indifferent as a metronome. Then the ventilator. A hiss, a push. A hiss, a push. Air forced into my chest like someone inflating a balloon that didn't want to be inflated.
My mouth was dry.
My tongue felt 3 times its normal size. My eyelids were sealed, not by choice, but by what the human body does when it shuts down and reboots in the wrong order. I tried to move my right hand. Nothing. My left hand. Maybe a small tremor. Or maybe I imagined it. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else, heavy and distant and numb from the hips down. Then the voices came. At first they were just shapes, sounds without meaning, like hearing a conversation in a language you don't speak. Slowly the shapes sharpened. They say the neurologist comes Tuesday. That was Kelsey. I recognized her before I understood the words because of her perfume. Vanilla and oat milk. Sweet enough to sting. She'd worn it since college. It was the first thing in that room that wasn't medical. Tuesday is too late. That was Jeanette. Closer. To my left. Possibly standing, possibly sitting in the vinyl chair, whose creak I would come to know as well as my own heartbeat. A third voice, male, older, professional. The doctor. Mrs. Harlow, the patient's condition is stable. There is brain activity. We need to give the body time. She wouldn't want to live like this. Jeanette's voice cut him off, and I felt something cold move through my chest that had nothing to do with the ventilator. I know my stepdaughter. She wouldn't want machines keeping her alive. I wanted to scream. I wanted to sit up and grab her arm and say, I'm right here. I can hear every word. I'm alive. But my body lay there sealed and silent, and the woman sitting beside me was trying to hand over the key to my coffin. The manila folder arrived the next morning. I heard Jeanette's heels first, 3 quick strikes on the linoleum, then the soft rustle of her sitting down, then the unmistakable sound of a clasp opening and papers sliding out. She hadn't closed the door completely. Noise from the hallway, a rolling cart, a distant intercom, filtered through the edges. Look at this. Her voice was low, directed at Kelsey. The papers crinkled. Douglas set up the trust, so she receives everything at age 30. Everything. $4 million. The number hung in the air between us. $4 million. I'd known about the trust in a general way. My father had mentioned it twice, once when I was 21 and once a few months before he died. The money from my mother's life insurance, invested and compounded over 20 years. He told me it would distribute on my 30th birthday. I hadn't thought much about it. I hadn't needed to. She's 29, Kelsey said quietly. 6 days. Jeanette's voice tightened, controlled, the voice of someone running calculations. 6 days and she turns 30. And if she's alive when that happens, every cent goes to her. Not to us. To her. But if she doesn't make it to 30, Kelsey didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The trust reverts to Douglas's estate, Jeanette said. Which, under the updated, will comes to me. All of it. A pause. There I was, breathing to the rhythm of a machine, and I felt the room rearrange itself around a fact I hadn't understood until that moment. The trust wasn't just money. It was a clock. And Jeanette had been counting the days from the moment I was admitted. 6 days. That's what my life was worth to the woman who'd made my father's soup for 12 years.
Not because she hated me.
Not because I'd done anything wrong, but because a calendar and a bank account had aligned in such a way that my death was financially convenient. I heard her close the manila folder and set it on the nightstand. The clasp clicked. I felt its weight about 3 inches from my hand, like a verdict someone had already signed. My father had told me about the trust sitting in his bedroom in February, thin as a reed by then, oxygen cannula hooked behind his ears, a glass of water, leaving rings on a coaster shaped like a trout. Sit down, Tor, he said, patting the edge of the bed. His hand was almost all bones, long fingers, swollen veins, skin like tissue paper. But still warm. Always warm. He explained it simply, the way he explained everything, like walking me through a blueprint. My mother Lauren had a $2 million life insurance policy. After she died, he invested it. Over 18 years it had grown to just over $4 million. He'd created a trust to protect it. Distribution date, my 30th birthday. Not a day before. No one can touch it, he said. Not Jeanette, not Kelsey, not even you until your birthday. Then he looked toward the window. I provided for Jeanette separately. The house is hers. But this money, he looked back at me. It's your mother's money, Tori. Your real mother's. He said it like something sacred. For him, it was. I didn't ask what would happen if I died before 30. It didn't occur to me to ask. I was 28, healthy, married, working. Death at 29 wasn't in my plans. But Douglas had planned for it. He'd planned for everything. And somewhere in the trust documents, in language I never read, there was a clause that said if the beneficiary died before the distribution date, the trust reverted to the grantor's estate. And Jeanette, under Douglas's updated will, was the sole heir to that estate. She had known that clause existed. Maybe she'd known it for a long time. Maybe even before Douglas died. Grant and I had a Tuesday tradition. It started when we were dating, back when he worked construction 6 days a week and called me every Tuesday at noon without fail. Not texts. A call. He said sending texts was like leaving someone a note on the door instead of knocking. The first Tuesday he called, I was sitting on the kitchen floor cross-legged eating cereal out of the box trying to fix a logo for a plumber who wanted something elegant, but also with character. Grant asked what I was doing. I told him.
He laughed.
He had a laugh that seemed to surprise even him every time it appeared. After we got married, the Tuesday calls continued. Sometimes 2 minutes. Sometimes 20. The content didn't matter. We were just checking in. The last time I spoke with Grant before the accident was a Tuesday morning. He asked if he should come with me to the cabin. Jeanette had called that morning, invited me up for the weekend, said Kelsey missed me, that the cabin needed someone young to help with the gutters. I told Grant I'd be fine. It was only 2 hours up the mountain. He told me to let him know when I arrived. I told him I always did. Lying in that hospital bed, counting the hours, I couldn't stop thinking about that call. Grant didn't know I was here. Or rather, Jeanette had made sure he thought he knew. She'd told the hospital he was abroad. She'd called him and told him I was stable, resting, that visitors weren't recommended. My husband was somewhere out there, probably at a job site, probably eating a gas station sandwich, probably looking at his phone waiting for a message from me that wasn't coming, not knowing that the woman he trusted to take care of me was measuring the distance between my birthday and my coffin. Nurse Donna spoke to me not because she believed I could hear her, at least not that first night, but because it was simply what she did. 23 years of nursing had taught her that. She told me later that talking to unconscious patients was just good practice. You never know who's listening, she said. And it's a lonely business, being in a coma. Her hands were warm and dry and smelled like betadine soap, that clean amber scent all hospital workers carry in their skin. She adjusted the foredrip, checked the ventilator connections, pressed 2 fingers to my wrist. Professional.
Quick.
But with a gentleness that felt different from the way Jeanette touched me. Jeanette's hands were cold. They always had been. And when she touched my arm earlier, her fingers pressed in a way that didn't feel like someone checking a pulse. It felt like someone testing temperature, like checking if a piece of meat was done. Donna wrote something in a small notebook she kept in her uniform pocket. Not in the hospital file. Her own notebook. I found out later she kept one every shift, for every patient. Timestamps, observations, small details the official record didn't capture. Little patterns. Hold on, sweetheart, she said. Then she left. Her sneakers squeaked softly on the linoleum, and I was alone again in the blue light. I didn't know it yet, but that little notebook was about to become the most important document of my life. On the second day, Jeanette was in the hallway outside my room with the door open about 4 inches, enough for her voice to carry. Yes, her husband is abroad on a construction project. It's been difficult to reach him. A pause. No, I'm her designated medical representative. I have the directive right here. I heard a nurse, young by the sound of her voice, probably new to the floor, say, Of course, Mrs. Harlow. We'll note that in the file. Grant wasn't abroad. Grant was 40 minutes away on a job site in Barlow County, probably eating lunch and checking his phone. Jeanette had called him the day I was admitted, told him the doctors had everything under control, that I was sedated and resting, and that visitors would only complicate the process. She'd used words like protocol and observation period, and the medical team recommends. Words official enough to make a worried husband doubt himself. And Grant trusted her because, why wouldn't he? She was family. She'd made Douglas's soup for 12 years. She had a manila folder full of documents that said she was in charge. On the third night, Jeanette stopped Dr. Callahan in the hallway outside my room. The door was cracked open about 6 inches. Enough to hear everything if I held very still. She's been in a coma for 3 days. The EEG shows minimal brain activity. I have the advance directive authorizing withdrawal of life support. Callahan spoke slowly. The voice of a man who had delivered bad news 1,000 times and knew that speed was the enemy of clarity. Mrs. Harlow, I understand your position and I respect the directive, but hospital protocol requires 72 additional hours of observation before we can proceed with withdrawal of life support. This gives us time. 72 hours. Jeanette's composure slipped for half a second. That's. Silence. I felt the pause in my chest. beyond what I can manage emotionally. I've been here every day. I need closure. Callahan didn't believe her. I could hear it in the way he paused before answering. Not long enough to be rude. Long enough to be deliberate. 72 hours is the standard, Mrs. Harlow. I'll schedule the evaluation for Thursday morning. Thursday morning. My birthday was Thursday. 72 hours from Wednesday night landed approximately at dawn on Thursday. If Callahan did his evaluation at 8 in the morning, the trust would have already distributed at midnight. Jeanette would lose everything. I heard her begin to pace in the hallway. 3 steps. Turn. 3 steps back. The sound of someone doing arithmetic in her head and not liking the results. Is there any way to accelerate the process? A second opinion? A transfer to another facility? You're welcome to seek a second opinion, Mrs. Harlow, but a transfer would restart the observation clock. The pacing stopped. I heard her exhale. Sharp. Controlled. The kind of exhale you make when you're swallowing a scream. 72 hours. I didn't know if it was enough time,
but it was all I had.
On the third night, past visiting hours, Jeanette had used the medical directive to get after-hours access. She and Kelsey came in together. I heard Jeanette's voice drop low, not out of concern for me. They thought I responded about as much as the mattress I was lying on. Whispers, because when you're planning something criminal, your voice lowers itself, whether anyone is listening or not. I called Reinhard this afternoon, Jeanette said. He says we can file an emergency petition to override the 72-hour protocol. Compassionate withdrawal. A judge can sign it by Thursday morning. Thursday morning is her birthday, Kelsey said. I know, Jeanette said. That's why I need the order signed before Wednesday night. If we get a judge to authorize withdrawal Wednesday afternoon, the hospital has to comply. She'll be gone before midnight. If you've ever had to lie completely still while someone plans your death less than a foot from your face, I can tell you this. The body wants to scream. Every muscle, every nerve, every fiber that evolution spent 1,000,000 years building, all of it is screaming, move, fight, run. But the part of your brain that kept our ancestors alive on the open plains, the part that knows sometimes the only way to survive is to play dead, that part says, do not move. I didn't move. Kelsey came back the next morning before Jeanette. I knew by the angle of her voice and the soft tap of her shoes. She sat. She didn't speak for a long time. I heard her breathing go irregular, that wet, unsteady sound that comes right before tears. Then she leaned forward. Tori. A whisper. I didn't want this.
I thought she was just talking. You know how she talks about things.
Like they're already decided, but nothing actually happens. I didn't think she'd actually do it.
A pause.
A sniff. The sound of her wiping her face. Your dad left everything to you. Everything. Mom got the house. And the house is a nothing, but there's no cash, no savings. The medical bills swallowed everything that wasn't in the trust. Do you know what it's like to watch your mother cut coupons at 54 years old? With kitchen scissors, because she can't afford the digital subscription. Her voice rose a little, tangled with something that sounded almost like rage. Not at me. At the situation. At the way the numbers had arranged themselves. I owe $87,000 in student loans. I have a business degree I can't use because there's no work and my boyfriend left and I'm 26 years old living with my mother in a dead man's house. I'm sorry, Tori. I really am. Then I heard her take out her phone. Her nail tapped the screen. A quick message. I found out later what it said. 3 words. How long left? That night, the 4th night, Donna came at 2 in the morning. The room was dark. The monitors cast that blue-green glow that made everything look underwater. She entered without a sound. She adjusted the 4, checked the ventilator reading, and then did something she hadn't done before. She lifted my left hand to check the pulse at my wrist. My finger moved. It wasn't planned, wasn't strategic. My body just did it. A tremor, a twitch, the smallest contraction of my index finger. But Donna felt it. I know because she stopped. Her breathing changed, and she didn't let go of my hand. Tori, she said. Her voice was barely a breath. Can you hear me? I tried again. I focused every gram of what still functioned in me toward that left index finger.
It moved.
A deliberate flex.
Donna didn't gasp.
Didn't call anyone. Didn't run out of the room. She just stood there holding my hand, and I felt her thumb press softly against my knuckles. A squeeze. Brief. Professional. And the warmest thing I had felt in 3 days. Then she let go. I heard the click of her pen. The scratch of writing in the notebook. I found out later what it said. 2:14 a.m. Voluntary flexion. Left index finger. 2 instances. Patient may have consciousness.
She paused.
I heard her look toward the door, a shift in the direction of her breathing. Then she closed her pen and put it back in her pocket. She didn't say anything to the day staff. Not yet. She told me later she needed to be sure. 1 flex could be involuntary. A reflex. 2 was interesting. But she needed more before she said anything, because if she reported consciousness and Jeanette was the legal authority, Jeanette would know. And something about Jeanette, Donna couldn't explain it logically. Not yet. But it unsettled her. Hold on, sweetheart, she whispered. Then she left. Her sneakers made their soft squeak down the hall until the sound disappeared. The next night, she closed the door completely. I heard the latch click. Tori. Her voice was calm.
Direct.
No warmth this time. Just clarity. I'm going to ask you some questions. If you can hear me, squeeze my finger once. She placed her index finger in my left palm. I squeezed. 1 firm contraction. Good. Twice for no.
A pause.
Do you have pain? 1 squeeze. Yes. Can you open your eyes? 2 squeezes.
No.
Is there someone you want me to call? 1 squeeze. Immediate.
Hard.
Your husband, Grant. 1 squeeze. Do you have his number in your phone? 2 squeezes. My phone had disappeared. Jeanette had taken it from the wreckage of the accident or from my bag. I didn't know which. But it wasn't in that room. Donna was quiet for a moment. I heard her breathe slow and deliberate. The breathing of someone making a decision. Listen to me carefully, she said, leaning closer. Her voice dropped to almost nothing. I've been a nurse for 23 years. I've seen a lot of families come through these doors. Most of them are scared and sad, and doing the best they can. But some of them, she paused. I don't know your stepmother. But whoever told this hospital your husband is abroad, I don't believe that's true. The way she talks about your treatment. The urgency around withdrawal. Something doesn't add up. I squeezed her finger with everything my weakened hand could give. She felt it. I'm going to find your husband. I'll use your old records. You were here 2 years ago for a wrist sprain. There should be an emergency contact on file. I'll call tomorrow. Another pause. But I need you to do something for me.
Stay still.
Don't let anyone know you're conscious. Not the day nurses, not Dr. Callahan, not anyone who might mention it to your stepmother.
Can you do that?
1 squeeze. Good girl. She patted my hand, stood, and opened the door. The hallway light cut a thin rectangle on the floor. Then she was gone, and for the first time in 4 days, I felt something other than fear. I felt that someone had arrived. Donna found Grant's number in my records from 2 years ago. She called from the nurse's break room at 12:15 on Tuesday, the only window she had that wasn't monitored by the charge nurse. Grant picked up on the second ring. He always did on Tuesdays. She told me the call lasted 4 minutes.
She spoke first.
Mr. Myers, my name is Donna Kowalski. I'm a registered nurse at Richview Medical Center. Your wife, Tori, is in the ICU. She's been here since Saturday. Silence. Then Grant's voice, cracking apart. What do you mean she's in the ICU?
Her stepmother called me.
She said Tori was stable. She said doctors recommended no visitors. Who told you that, sir?
Jeanette.
Jeanette Harlow. Donna waited. She told me later she could feel the rage building on the other end of the line, the way you feel a storm coming before you can see the clouds. My wife is alive, Grant said. She's alive and she's conscious. More silence. Donna let it sit. I'm on my way, Grant said. Don't come through the main entrance. Your stepmother has restricted access. Come to the east entrance on the 4th floor. After 10 p.m. I'll meet you in the stairwell. His voice cut for a moment.
Is she
okay? Donna paused. Then carefully, Mr. Myers. 3 words before he hung up. Donna told me later, sitting beside me in the dark, her voice warm and steady. He said, "She's my wife." Grant was in the east stairwell at 9:49. 20 minutes early. Donna told me he still had work boots on and cement dust in his hair. She guided him through the hallway, and I heard them coming. 2 sets of footsteps, one soft and familiar, one heavy and slightly too fast. The sound of a man trying not to run. The door opened. The room was dark. Donna closed it behind them and said, barely audible, "She can hear you. Go ahead." Grant's steps crossed the room. He stopped beside my bed. I could smell him. Cement dust and sweat and the faint cedar soap he used every morning, and that smell undid something inside me that had been holding for 4 days. My throat burned. My eyes ached behind their sealed lids. He knelt down. I felt his knees hit the floor. I felt the mattress shift as he leaned toward me, and then his hand, rough and large and warm from running through the parking lot, wrapped around my left hand and did not let go. "I'm here."
His voice was thick,
split in half. The voice of a man fighting with everything he had not to make a sound. "I'm here, Tori. I'm not going anywhere." I squeezed his hand. One squeeze. The hardest squeeze I'd managed since I woke up. I heard him exhale, a shaking, unsteady breath, and then silence. The kind of silence that happens when someone is crying without making noise, shoulders trembling, jaw clamped shut, tears falling onto hospital sheets. Donna gave him a minute. Then she pulled a chair close and sat across from him, and in a quiet, clinical voice, she told him everything. The power of attorney. Jeanette's behavior. The visitor restrictions. The urgency around withdrawal. The emergency judicial order being requested. The 72-hour protocol and Jeanette's attempt to route around it. She explained what she had heard through half-open doors and written in her notebook. Grant listened. I felt his hand tighten around mine as each piece locked into place. When Donna finished, the room went quiet. Then Grant said, "What do we do?" "Call a lawyer tonight," Donna said. "Preferably one who specializes in trusts and estates. And then call the police." Grant didn't let go of my hand all night. He stayed in the vinyl chair until 5 in the morning when Donna told him he had to leave before the day shift arrived. He stood, pressed his lips to my forehead, whispered something I will keep only for myself. His hand was the last thing I felt before he went.
Rough, warm,
steady, not letting go until the very last second. Grant called Martin Folke at 6:30 Wednesday morning, sitting in his truck in the hospital parking lot with the engine off and the windows open. Folke was the attorney who had drafted Douglas's trust 15 years ago. 71 years old, semi-retired, answered the phone the way people of his generation do. On the third ring, with his full name, Grant told him everything. Folke confirmed the trust. For $1,200,000. Distribution date, Thursday at 12:01 in the morning. If Tori died before distribution, the trust reverted to Douglas's estate. Jeanette Harlow, as sole heir to that estate, would receive everything. If your wife is alive at midnight, Folke said, the trust distributes automatically. Mrs. Harlow gets nothing. She's alive, Grant said. And she's conscious. Folke called Detective Morrison from the Waukesha County Sheriff's Office. Morrison was 43, ex-military, the kind of detective who wrote everything down and made decisions the way someone defuses an explosive device. With method. Without unnecessary movement. Morrison wanted evidence. Donna provided it. Her notebook, 23 years of habit, contained time-stamped entries for every shift since my admission. Jeanette's arrivals and departures. Overheard conversations through cracked open doors. The visitor restriction request. The claim that Grant was abroad. The urgent push for withdrawal. Dr. Callahan, when Morrison contacted him, confirmed that my brain activity had shown consistent improvement. Consistent with a patient regaining consciousness. Not deteriorating. He agreed to provide my full medical file by subpoena. Donna faxed her notes from the nurse's station at 11 o'clock Wednesday night. The machine hummed and whirred and spat out 18 pages of timestamps and observations, each one written in the same small, careful handwriting. 23 years of nursing, one notebook per shift, every detail she'd recorded while no one was watching. She hadn't known she was building a case. She was just doing her job. The same job she'd done every shift since 2003. The same job she did when no one was looking. The manila folder that Jeanette had brought to my room on day one, the one she had set on my nightstand with that decisive class click, that folder became the first piece of evidence that would unravel her. Detective Morrison obtained a copy of the advance healthcare directive she had submitted to the hospital. He also obtained the original document from Douglas's estate attorney, the version filed 3 years ago when I was 23 and single and signing papers I barely read. They did not match. The original directive, drafted by Douglas's attorney, authorized Jeanette to make medical decisions on my behalf. Treatment choices, medication approvals, hospital transfers, standard medical power of attorney scope. Nowhere in the original document was there any mention of life support. Nowhere was withdrawal of ventilation authorized. The version Jeanette submitted to the hospital had an extra page. Page 4 of 4. The original was 3 pages. That 4th page contained a specific clause authorizing the healthcare representative to order withdrawal of life-sustaining measures, including mechanical ventilation, should the patient be determined to be in a persistent vegetative state. My signature was at the bottom of the page. Except it wasn't my signature. Morrison's forensic analyst identified it as a scanned copy of my signature from the original document, placed digitally onto the falsified page. The resolution was good enough to fool a hospital administrator reviewing intake paperwork. But under magnification, the ink density was uniform in a way that a pen on paper never is. Jeanette had added a page giving herself permission to kill me. And she had signed it with my own name. Morrison called Grant at 11:30 Wednesday night. "We have enough," he said. Attempted murder for the brake tampering. The mechanic she'd hired collapsed under 48 hours of questioning and gave a full confession. Conspiracy to commit murder for the documented plan to withdraw life support before the trust distributed. Document fraud for the altered directive. "We can arrest her in the morning." "In the morning?" Grant's voice went sharp. "She's filed a court order." "It won't be granted. I've already contacted the judge's clerk. But if we arrest her tonight, we show our hand and lose the opportunity to document the judicial petition attempt as additional evidence." Grant didn't like it, but he understood it. The same way he understood construction. You don't pour the concrete until the forms are set properly. Thursday morning, my 30th birthday, 8 a.m. I heard Jeanette's heels first, confident, clipped, and Kelsey's softer steps behind her. Jeanette was holding papers. I could hear them crinkle in her hand. "I need to speak with Dr. Callahan," she told the nurse at the station. "I have a court order authorizing." The door to room 412 opened. And it wasn't Dr. Callahan who came through at first. It was a man in a dark jacket who said, calmly and clearly, "Jeanette Harlow?" "Yes? Who are you?" "Detective Morrison, Waukesha County Sheriff's Office." "Kelsey Harlow, are you also present?" "I'm here. What is this about?" Kelsey's voice was a full note higher than normal. "Jeanette Harlow and Kelsey Harlow, you are both under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and document fraud." The room went silent. Not hospital quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that swallows all other sounds. "This is absurd." Jeanette's voice was tight, controlled, but I could hear the edges fraying. "She's in a coma. It's impossible that." I opened my eyes. The light hit me like a white wall, fluorescent, blinding after 5 days of darkness. I blinked once. Twice. The room rippled, shapes resolving slowly. The blue monitors. The 4-stand. The window with morning light pouring through curtains no one had thought to open. And Jeanette, standing at the foot of my bed. Manila folder in one hand. A court order in the other. Mouth open, not making a sound. I looked at her. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. 5 days of silence, and everything I needed to say was already in my eyes. Behind her, 2 uniformed officers moved forward. One of them read the Miranda rights. Jeanette stood perfectly still, like someone who has received a blow but hasn't felt it yet. Kelsey collapsed into the vinyl chair and covered her face with her hands, crying in a way that shook the whole chair. Grant appeared in the doorway, still wearing the same work boots from Tuesday night. Cement dust still in the creases. Donna was beside him, technically off shift, still in yesterday's uniform, because she had refused to leave until Folky arrived. Dr. Callahan came last, with the carefully blank expression of a man who has just discovered what his patient's family had actually been planning. Jeanette looked at me. I looked at her. Neither of us blinked. Then they walked her out of room 412, and the morning light stayed exactly where it was. 2 hours later, a man I had never seen walked in carrying a leather briefcase and a birthday card. Martin Folky was 71, thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and the posture of someone who had spent 50 years reading documents. He set the briefcase on the rolling table, opened it with 2 precise clicks, and removed a folder.
White.
Blue tab. Myers Trust. "Happy birthday, Tori," he said, without sentiment, like a notary stamping a seal. A fact, not a greeting. Grant was in the chair beside me, his hand wrapped around mine, the way it had been since the police left. Donna was by the door. She had refused to go home until this was finished, even though her shift had ended 9 hours ago. As of 12:01 this morning, Folky said, adjusting his glasses and reading from the trust instrument, the Douglas Aaron Myers Irrevocable Trust has been fully distributed to the sole beneficiary, Tori Lauren Myers. Total trust value, per the most recent quarterly statement, is $4,217,000. He looked up. "It is entirely yours. No conditions. No contingencies. Mrs. Harlow has no claim. The statute of unworthiness included by your father's attorney in the trust terms would have disqualified her regardless of the criminal charges."
He paused.
"Your father planned for everything, Mrs. Myers." I stared at him. My throat was raw. The ventilator tube had been removed 2 hours earlier, and every breath felt like swallowing sandpaper. But I managed one word. The first word I had spoken in 5 days. "Thanks." Then I looked at Donna. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching the scene with the expression of someone who had done this for 23 years and had stopped being surprised by almost everything. Except for this. Her eyes were wet, barely, the kind of wet that a woman like Donna would blink away before anyone noticed.
"Both of them," I said.
My voice was gravel, barely audible, but the room was quiet enough. Donna nodded once, a small smile. Then she turned toward the door. "For the record," she said over her shoulder, "your vitals were never as flat as they told me they were." Her sneakers squeaked down the hallway until the sound was gone. Jeanette's case moved through the system the way these cases do. Slowly, methodically, with a great deal of paperwork. The mechanic she had hired to loosen my brake line broke in less than 48 hours of questioning. He gave a full confession. The document fraud charge was airtight. The forensic analysis was definitive. Jeanette was denied bail. The judge cited flight risk and the severity of the charges. Kelsey took a plea. Conspiracy to commit fraud, accessory charges. Her attorney argued she'd acted under her mother's influence, which was partially true and partly convenient. She cooperated fully, turned over text messages, confirmed the timeline, testified about conversations I had already heard from my hospital bed. The judge gave her 3 to 5 years. She wrote me a 4-page handwritten letter from the detention center. I read every word. I didn't write back. Not out of anger, though I felt it for a long time. But there are relationships that cannot be repaired with a letter, the same way a car cannot be fixed with an apology. The damage was structural. The house Douglas had left Jeanette was subject to forfeiture proceedings after conviction. The court determined the bequest had been made under circumstances that preceded the criminal conspiracy. I sold it and added the proceeds to my trust. My mother's money. My father's house. Finally where it was supposed to be. 6 months later I was back at my desk. The spare room was still the spare room, same desk, same window, same view of the backyard. But it felt different. I'd painted the walls sage green. Grant said it looked like a medical office. I told him it looked like the room of someone who is still alive to pick paint colors. The design project on my screen was for a bakery in Coupern. They wanted a logo. Something warm. Something with flowers. I was on the third draft, and none of them felt quite right, but I wasn't frustrated. I was just working. Working felt like breathing.
Ordinary.
Automatic. And entirely precious. The phone rang at noon on Tuesday. Grant's number. How's the logo?
Very floral, I said.
He laughed. That laugh that still surprised him every time it showed up. Want me to bring anything home?
Just you. Deal.
I hung up and looked out the window. On the kitchen sill, where it had always been, the basil plant rested in its terracotta pot. I'd repotted it in August when the old pot cracked in a heat wave. The new one was slightly larger.
More room to grow.
The basil had taken to it immediately, the way living things do when you give them a little more space. I thought about that last normal Saturday morning. Standing at that window, watering that plant, my biggest worry being whether the stems were getting too leggy. Then Jeanette called, and I said yes, and I drove up into the mountains and the brakes went soft at kilometer 42, and the guardrail came at me like a silver wall. She had planned it so carefully, and she had almost gotten away with it. Almost. I got up from the desk, walked to the kitchen, and cut 3 basil leaves with scissors. Left them on the cutting board for dinner. The leaves were deep green, almost translucent in the afternoon light. The color of something that had survived a drought and come back thicker. A year later, I returned to the hospital. Not as a patient. I walked in through the east entrance, the same door Grant had used that Tuesday night, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. The hallway was the same. The linoleum. The distant intercom. The particular hum of machines behind closed doors. It was 10 at night. Donna's shift. I waited by the stairwell. I was carrying a white rectangular box tied with a simple ribbon. Inside was a pair of nursing shoes. Good ones. The kind with memory foam insoles and reinforced arches, because I had researched what nurses actually wanted, and the answer apparently is always better shoes. Donna came around the corner at 10:01. Uniform on. Notebook in her pocket. Stethoscope around her neck. She saw me and stopped. "Tori," she said, "the way you confirm a diagnosis." "Hi, Donna." I held out the box.
She looked at it.
Then at me. Then she took it, opened the lid, and removed one shoe. She held it up to the fluorescent light and examined it from every angle, the way she would inspect a piece of evidence. "You didn't have to do this. You didn't have to squeeze my hand at 2 in the morning. But you did." She looked at me for a long time. Then she put the shoe back in the box and tucked it under her arm. We hugged.
Short. Tight.
The embrace of 2 people who know that anything longer would require a conversation neither of us was ready for. "Go home," she said, smiling. "I have patience." I walked back down the hallway. Past room 412. Someone else's monitors now. Someone else's fight. I took the elevator down, walked out through the east entrance into the parking lot, and sat for a moment in my car with the engine off and the windows open. The night air smelled like cut grass and the first cold edge of autumn. There are people who save your life with surgery. There are people who save it with a phone call at midnight. Donna saved mine with a notebook, a squeeze, and the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum. I started the engine, pulled out of the lot, drove home with my eyes wide open.